This next PowerPoint will focus on oogenesis and the uterine and ovarian cycles in the female reproductive system. So oogenesis is the process that creates the female gamete, which is going to be the ovum. The process begins before birth in the female fetus, when the germ cell, the oogonium, will begin to divide by mitosis, creating the primary oocytes. Primary oocytes will initiate the first meiotic division, but it does not finish it. It stops right at prophase 1. So now we have a primary oocyte, which is a 2N cell that has started the first part of meiosis, meiosis 1, but it did not finish it. After birth, the female ovaries contain primordial follicles, where these primary oocytes are going to be found. At puberty, each month, one of these primordial follicles that house a primary oocyte will be stimulated by FSH into the restart of meiosis 1. The cell will finish meiosis 1 and divide into 2 cells. One large cell, which will be the secondary oocyte. This is a haploid cell, and another smaller cell that will be destroyed, called a polar body. So notice that in contrast with spermatogenesis, during oogenesis, first of all, the process begins before birth. Second, meiotic divisions lead to unequal cellular division. One cell will be huge and functional, while the other will be small and non-functional and will be destroyed. In spermatogenesis, each division creates a working cell, functional cell. So we end up with 4 spermatozoa per spermatogonia. Here we're in the process of making 1 ova or per oogonium. This secondary oocyte will be found in the mature secondary Graafian follicle that will initiate meiosis 2, but it will stop. It will not finish meiosis 2. It will not be until or if this secondary oocyte is fertilized, that it will quickly finish meiosis 2, dividing again by the second meiotic division into 2 unequal cells, a fertilized large egg, and a non-functioning polar body that will be destroyed. This slide is contrasting and comparing spermatogenesis with oogenesis. Remember that spermatogenesis begins at puberty, and it will give rise, is a continuous event that gives rise to 4 spermatozoa per spermatogonia. On the other hand, oogenesis begins in the fetus. It is arrested, continues after puberty. Only the meiotic divisions are unequal, creating 1 large secondary oocyte and a smaller polar body during the first meiotic division. And if the cell is fertilized, then the second meiotic division will happen, creating a fertilized cell, fertilized zygote, and a second polar body that will also be destroyed. So the second meiotic division doesn't even happen if the cell is not fertilized. So at this point, you should be able to explain when does oogenesis start, when does it end, where is the oogonium found, what part of the ovaries, the cortex, not the medulla, which of these cells are haploid, which are diploid. Oogonium and primary oocytes are diploid, starting at the secondary oocyte, and spermatids will be haploid. Primary spermatocyte will be the same as the primary oocyte, it will be diploid. Which of these cells are the product of mitotic division and which are the product of meiotic division? Primary oocyte is mitotic, secondary is meiotic. The cell that is ovulated is the secondary oocyte. We have contrasted oogenesis with the spermatogenesis. You should know what we mean by these polar bodies. And sorry about that. And what types of cells are will be found in the ovaries of a female baby. Those will be the primary oocytes. Okay, we're going to look at the hormonal cycles in the female. Hormonal cycles are a series of hormonal events that happen monthly after puberty, and these are associated with the maturation of the egg in the ovaries. There are two phases that last, actually you couldn't even argue three phases, that are going to last 28-day cycles. The follicular cell, which happens between days 1 and 14, which is the period of follicular growth, thanks to the actions of FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Then in the middle of the cycle, on day 14, ovulation takes place. And then the luteal phase begins, luteal because of the corpus luteum. And in this period, the corpus luteum is made after ovulation. That's what's left behind after ovulation. And the corpus luteum will continue to secrete estrogen and progesterone until the oocyte's fate is determined. If it is fertilized, then the function of the corpus luteum continues through the first stages of pregnancy. If it's not fertilized, the corpus luteum turns into a corpus albicans, which is a non-functional structure. So between days 1 and 14, we have the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle. And this is the place where the primordial follicles are activated by FSH, which are being secreted by the anterior pituitary. LH, on the other hand, is also being secreted, and it stimulates follicular cells into secreting the female sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone. The follicle continues to develop and enlarge to go from a primordial follicle into a primary follicle. Continuing with this first stage of the ovarian cycle, the follicular phase, the primary follicle becomes a secondary follicle as the follicular cells continue to divide and create more cells, which in turn increase the secretion of estrogen and progesterone. The stratified epithelium, the granulosa cells, form around the primary oocyte. So these are the granulosa cells. And they will continue to secrete again estrogen and progesterone, guiding the oocyte through its development. The secondary follicle becomes a late secondary follicle as the antrum, the fluid-filled space, begin to appear, isolating the oocyte from the follicular cells that are away from it. The follicular cells continues to secrete estrogen and progesterone, and FSH continues to be secreted also, stimulating follicular maturation. Estrogen also stimulates follicular maturation. The antrum expands as the secondary follicle matures, and now we have a visible zona pellucida around the oocyte. You can see it right there. The thecal follicular cells and the granulosal cells continue to secrete estrogen and progesterone. And at the end of these follicular phase, the oocyte will go through the first mitotic division and become secondary oocyte. The secondary oocyte is going to start meiosis 2, but it's not going to finish. So now we have the late secondary oocyte, which becomes a mature follicle. The mature follicle is called a vesicular follicle, a Graafian follicle. Sometimes it's also called a tertiary follicle. So this is the mature follicle right here. It's a very big structure. You can see the antrum, the fluid-filled space, that is separating the granulosa cells, which are the cells surrounding the secondary follicle, from the thecal cells at the surface of the follicle. The let's see, the structure that surrounds the oocyte called the zona pellucida is definitely visible. Is that thin line right there? Okay, so this is the follicle or the oocyte that's going to be ovulated at the end of the ovarian cycle. So the ovarian wall ruptures and expels the secondary oocyte with the cells around it, the corona radiata. The pain that sometimes is felt at ovulation is called the Mittelschmeissers. I think I'm pronouncing it halfway correct. 1 to 2% of ovulation releases more than one secondary oocyte. In other words, sometimes more than one of these follicles is released. More than one of these primordial follicles is stimulated and reaches completion, ovulating more than one oocyte. And if both of them are fertilized, then you can have fraternal twins. Identical twins happens when one oocyte, for unknown reasons, is fertilized and it splits into two different cells. That will be identical twins. Okay. Ovulation happens due to the rise in luteinizing hormone, LH. So ovulation, LH is the hormone of ovulation. A sudden rise in LH is what's going to stimulate ovulation. The ovarian wall ruptures and expels the secondary oocyte with the cells around it, which are the corona radiata cells. What's left behind is the corpus luteum that continues to secrete estrogen and progesterone. And now we have the luteal phase after ovulation of the ovarian cycle. During this phase, the corpus luteum continues to secrete estrogen and progesterone. High levels of estrogen causes the inhibition of the secretion of FSH and LH. So at this point, a surge in estrogen inhibits secretion of FSH and LH because now we're going to prepare for a potential pregnancy. So we cannot start another cycle. If no pregnancy happens, the corpus luteum degenerates into a non-functioning corpus albicans. So the establishment of the ovarian cycle happens at puberty, when levels of gonadotropic releasing hormone from the hypothalamus increase. So the bursts of the release of this hormone begin to increase, and that causes the eventual secretion of FSH and LH by the anterior pituitary, which will act on the ovaries and initiate the maturation of the follicles. These events will continue until the first menstruation and will continue until the last menstruation, which is menopause. So we should be able to describe the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle. what are the hormones secreted during the phase, and what are the follicular cells, and what are granulosa cells. Remember, the granulosa cells are the follicular cells that remain close to the oocyte. All of these cells are going to be secreting estrogen and progesterone. You should know at what point in the cycle ovulation takes place and what is the hormone of ovulation. That will be luteinizing hormone. Describe the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle, what the hormones involved, and distinguish between the corpus luteum and the corpus albicans, and what happens to the oocyte if fertilization takes place. Going along with the ovarian cycle is the uterine cycle, which is taking place at roughly the same time. During the uterine cycle, now we're looking at what's happening in the endometrium of the uterus. These cycles, both ovarian and uterine cycles, begin at menarche and continue until menopause. Menarche refers to the first menstruation. Menopause is the hormonal changes that lead to the cessation of menses. Amenorrhea is an absence of menstruation, typically due to abnormal conditions. So the uterine cycle begins at menses, at menstruation. That's the start of the cycle. This will be the end of the ovarian cycle and the beginning of the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle. So this is the degeneration of the endometrium, the functional zone of the endometrium. The shedding of the functional zone, that's what we call menstruation. Following this phase, we go into the proliferative phase, and this is stimulated by progesterone, which is being secreted by the follicular cells in the ovaries. The proliferative zone restores the functional zone of the endometrium, and as more and more progesterone is secreted, the endometrial glands in the functional zone enlarges and begin to secrete what would become the food for the fertilized zygote if fertilization takes place. The area becomes very thick and vascular. Again, all this is in preparation for pregnancy. So this is a look at the uterine cycle. Again, it starts with menses, continues into the proliferative phase when the functional zone is rebuilt, and goes into the secretory phase when the glands are actually visible and secreting fluids that will feed a potential fertilized egg. So you should be able to describe the proliferative phase of the uterine cycle and name the hormones and uterine tissues involved. The hormone will be estrogen, but especially progesterone. The uterus is especially sensitive to progesterone. Describe the secretory phase and the uterine cycle, name the hormones and uterine tissues involved. We're continuing with the same hormones, progesterone mainly. The causes of menses, the hormones involved, and the uterine tissue involved. So the tissue will be the functional zone. The hormone of the menses, again, will be progesterone. When menses is taking place in the uterus, and actually in this case, it will be also an increase in estrogen that will cause the menses. When menses is taking place in the uterus, what is happening in the ovary? The ovary is beginning with the ovarian phase. We're going to stop this recording now, and the next recording will look at female hormones and the physiology of sexual intercourse in females.